Hello and welcome to this video on why and how it is that human menstruation is not just weird, but practically hostile because of evolution. Humans are somewhat unique in terms of mammals that menstruate. In fact, not all mammals do menstruate, but there are some. The primates are especially common examples, but you can also look to bats, the elephant, shrew, and spiny mouse. Even with comparable species, and especially those close to our own, Homo sapien, humans are still weird and unique. First, human females menstruate vastly more than any other species. We don't just mean the individual cycles, but the volume, extent, and duration of menstruation, both for the cycle and over a lifetime. This is probably not used to any woman. They are probably going to be saying something really unpleasant, or screaming at us. You're probably telling us menstruation is weird. How about you experience yourself and then come back? If we ignore the last issue, yes, we'll tell you because it is weird and it is very much worth discussing. First, there is the reality that pregnancy is actually a fight, not to give birth. That is just the last bout. We mean a fight from before conception even occurs. The mother is, actually going to go through a sort of a prophylaxis each time she menstruates. A prophylaxis to prevent pregnancy. So much for the beauty of new life. New life has to fight its way to being with teeth, nails, and clawing at the mother to prevent spontaneous abortion. This is probably why pregnancy is often associated with great discomfort and suffering. No war is without casualties or attrition. This is before accounting for actual complications that are not directly related to the broader process we'll discuss. Most animals that have achieved a degree of complexity will go through anything for reproduction. They will sacrifice their well-being, even their life if it gives the children the chance to live. Humans? A pregnancy is done with the mother's body actively trying to prevent pregnancy. But why and how? It comes back to the menstruation issue and how it works. Unlike other animals, the human placenta is a separate thing from the uterus. Very separate, as in being a separate entity, separate. In fact, it is effectively part of the developing fetus. This is a rather unique structure known as a hemochorial placenta. The uterus itself is structured as you would have learned in school to some degree, assuming you weren't more busy giggling at the reproductive organs and tissues. The endometrium is a tissue full of tiny blood vessels. These are the main and realistically only blood supply to newly implanted embryos. The placenta literally has to burrow into the soft endometrial tissue to facilitate implantation. It's not a gentle, soft process. It is rather more aggressive. The process should, as a result, cause inflammation and ultimately a reaction aborting the fetus. But no. This is because the embryo produces hormones that countermand the biology of the mother. Rather than telling the blood vessels to constrict and therefore facilitating blood flow being cut off, it instead tells the blood vessels to, in some cases, simply freeze, or in other cases dilate. This lets even more blood flow into the local area. This is the epitome of the spice must flow mantra, except for blood. All of the things we've mentioned lead to direct, unfettered access to the mother's blood, and the ability to parasitize as much as needed. The embryo can pillage the blood flow for everything it needs for growth and development. In fact, the hormones go beyond the local environmental issue, or endometrial tissue in this case. The hormones can go beyond the fetus and endometrium to cause changes in blood sugar levels, blood pressure changes, and more in the mother. This degree of interference can even get to the point of fetal cells, crossing into the mother and remaining for her life. But life is the key reason why all this is happening. The fetus wants to live and live the best life it can with the highest chances of success. The mother wants it to live, but also the other children she may yet have. It is sibling rivalry, except one sibling actually has started to exist while the others are still firmly ensconced in the testicles of the father and ovaries of the mother. But it is the first child being very much selfish. In fact, this might get more complicated because of the father. A paternal imprinting can cause the fetus to express certain genes that exacerbate the selfish nature of the developing embryo or fetus. Basically, they're even more of a firstborn child. This brings us back to why menstruation exists, as it does, and why it happens, particularly why it's weird. Menstruation is a sort of inevitable result of the very one-sided demands of the fetus over which the mother has very little control. The fetus wants to get everything. This can lead to the mother being sacrificed on the altar of what the fetus wants. The mother, on the other hand, wants every child to get something, and the father wants offspring to continue his genetic legacy, assuming they are his.
I don't know.
100%. Twitter.
I'm 100%.
All it takes is one time.
Exactly.
That's what I want to see. Come on, Warren. Come on. Prepare the crowd.
In the case of 3-year-old Christian, Brooklyn, you are not.
Sadly, evolution had no more Povich to mitigate this issue, but it means there are 3 very different and very much competing interests. To control the process of pregnancy from an evolutionary point of view, this is where menstruation comes in, like the Kool-Aid man. It lets the mother choose to abort a weak, inviable, or dangerous embryo. If environmental conditions make it impossible, this may also happen. And this is where the endometrium is key. It is the first barrier to prevent pregnancy by weak or, let's say, unwanted or possibly unwanted embryos. It is a barrier of sorts that delays implantation, and therefore time is available to decide what to do. Without blood that is protected by the endometrium, the embryo can't live. It is like a mosquito or leech that needs a host to live, or they will die from starvation. Further, once implantation occurs, the mother has a vested interest in keeping the fetus alive, as the loss of an implanted embryo can cause the mother to bleed out from hemorrhage. Therefore, delaying that, and therefore essentially being forced into maintaining the pregnancy, is a good idea. It certainly means they're more likely to be able to survive for longer if anything was to go wrong. However, it also leads to a problem. The endometrium, as it is structured, makes it much harder to communicate with the local tissue via hormones from the mother. The blood vessels are buried much deeper than the actual endometrial tissue in which the embryo implants. Thereby, it slows down the effect of any kind of hormonal communication from the mother. Inversely, it means the embryo implanting itself is able to more easily influence the tissue, as it can express hormones directly and certainly in greater quantities and far more easily. As you can imagine, this is all well and good when the pregnancy occurs, but, it allows you to maintain a pregnancy, let's say, and certainly sustain it. But what if it fails? What if the embryo can't implant? What if something occurs that is congenital or perhaps a more insidious cause? Or what to do? The answer is menstruation in human females, or at least as human females know it. Dispose of the entire top layer, sloughing it off and discarding the tissue. In fact, this ironically is very similar to the mechanisms used by the fetus to ensure its survival. And this allows for the essentially non-viable, deleterious, or otherwise unwanted, we feel like that's going to get us in trouble, but it will do as a description, the fetus to be disposed of. The similarities in hormonal regulation are that, well, to start with, both processes are tightly regulated by the ovarian steroids, particularly progesterone and estrogen. Progesterone has a central role in implantation, and progesterone drives endometrial decidualization, the transformation of stromal cells into specialized decidual cells, which create a receptive, as we mentioned, not necessarily receptive, but a slightly less hostile environment for the embryo. Similarly, during the secretory phase leading to menstruation, progesterone induces decidualization, and this is in preparation for potential implantation. The withdrawal of it triggers the breakdown process if no embryo signals like human chorionic gonadotropin sustains it. Then we have estrogen priming. Estrogen promotes endometrial proliferation in the follicular phase. This sets the stage for both implantation receptivity and build-up that precedes sloughing if unused. After that, you have prostaglandins, glucocorticoids with compounds like prostaglandin E2, PGE2, and F2-alpha or PGF2-alpha, modulate vascular tone and inflammation in both scenarios. This supports angiogenesis, that's the creation of more blood vessels, during implantation and contributes to vasoconstriction and repair during menstruation. And then we have receptor dynamics. Progesterone receptors such as PRA and PRB, their isoforms, are expressed in endometrial stromal cells for both, and this maintains responsiveness until withdrawal initiates inflammatory cascades in menstruation or sustained levels during pregnancy. There's also a certain amount of similarity in tissue remodeling and repair. The tissue restructuring is a common thing. Common thing's perhaps the best way to word it. You have the matrix metalloproteases, or MMPs, with enzymes like MMP1, 2, 3, and 9. These break down the extracellular matrix in both processes. This facilitates trophoblast invasion during implantation, and endometrial breakdown during sloughing. The activity is balanced by tissue inhibitors, TIMPs. This prevents excessive damages. It would just cascade out of control if allowed to run amok. Vascular remodeling, as mentioned with angiogenesis, and particularly changes in spiral arterioles, we should say, occur in both implantation, requiring vessel elongation for placental development, while menstruation involves a vasoconstriction to limit bleeding, followed by the VEGF-driven repair. The epithelial-mesenchymal transitions are processes like, say, mesenchymal epithelial transmission contribute to re-epithelialization after shedding and menstruation, mirroring the epithelial adaptations that support embryo attachment in implantation. And then we have regeneration without scarring. Both the implantation and, obviously, menstruation rely on rapid repair mechanisms involving progenitor cells and anti-inflammatory resolution. This ensures the endometrium remains functional for future cycles or future pregnancy maintenance. These remodeling similarities underscore that the endometrium is fairly dynamic, where preparation for implantation inherently includes pathways for orderly dismantling if, rather obviously, a pregnancy either comes to term, in which case baby is born, and you need to rebuild everything, or embryo implantation is not successful, therefore you need to dispose of everything and prepare again for next cycle. This is why the menstrual cycle in human females is relatively weird, and not just weird in and of itself, but runs completely contrary to the generally accepted image of, hey, this is part of the cycle of life, isn't it lovely? And no, it's incredibly hostile and unpleasant, and it's amazing that humanity has survived for as long as it has, given that the human body actively works against not only the next generation, but just getting pregnant in the first place, let alone sustaining that pregnancy, and all of the other complications that can arise, such as hemolytic disease of the newborn, which would bring the next generation to a very sudden and very unpleasant halt. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. And please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.